North Carolina. This is where Love Art Revolution began.
I was born in Havana, Cuba. I moved to North Carolina in August of 1999, right before the millennium. I wanted just something different. I was kind of tired of the traffic in Miami and just the craziness. You know, I had a construction company here in North Carolina. I used to build custom homes, 10, 20 houses a year. But the economy crashed in 2008, and that's when I realized that there was no way out. There was really, the only way out was for me to file for bankruptcy. So, you know, I went through the whole hard process, and, you know, the banks took everything, and I was just left with one house. But, you know, it was such a big relief when that happened. But I was still like very stressed out. I was like, wow, what am I going to do with my life? What's going to happen? What am I going to do? So I started to draw. I started to go back to my original love, which was art. I thought this was just going to be something temporary that would help me stay sane while this was going on. I really didn't foresee this going anywhere. One day started to snow real hard, and I just, you know, I was like in the house, and I said, you know, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to play with the snow, because I didn't want to be at home. You get cabin fever. And I made this beautiful sculpture out of snow. I had never done a sculpture of any kind ever before that. And I told Mara, and then she came out and said, wow, you've got a raw talent for that. You should really take some classes. So that was the beginning of my sculpture. I took some classes in a local college. I went to Raleigh to take some classes. Not really classes. They were like just, you know, like workshops. You go on the weekend and then they have like clay, and then you just say, okay, here's clay. And here's a naked girl, just do it. And if you got any questions, let me know. So I just did it, you know, and so I did it for a couple of months, and I was really good. The professor really loved my work, and a lot of people loved my work, and they said, wow, you've got a really good talent for this. You got an eye for sculpture. But I said, you know, I'm starting so late in my life as an artist, or if I want to do something different, it has to be something radical. It has to be something that no one is doing. What about if I don't use clay, but I use paper, and and then I glue these paper shots. So that's what I did. I glue a block of paper, every single paper glued. So it was one massive block of paper. It looked like, you know, it was stone. So I started to carve on it. Beautiful sculpture came out. It was so good you couldn't really tell it was paper. So I said, how the hell am I going to prove to somebody this is paper? Because, you know, it doesn't look like it. It looks like a stone. I had a fascination for animation. I studied animation on my own, books and things like that, and I always wanted to be an animator. And that animation really played in, because I started to take those papers and I started to glue the papers in a way, and you know, it took me over a year to kind of develop the whole technique, but little by little I started to develop that, and I started to see how I can animate these things. But I also knew the art capital of the world now is New York City. My first sculpture, when I did, I took to New York, and I hired a photographer or videographer to come with me. And we just went around Washington Square Park and different places, and just kind of gets people's feedback, because I really had no idea. And it was just, people were just blown away. As soon as I laid the sculpture there on the ground, people would pass by and say, oh wow, that's a neat sculpture. I said, wait to see what you can do. So and as I pull these sculptures, you can just see their jaws dropped. When people would say, what are you? I said, no, I'm just, for some reason I couldn't say that I was an artist. It just wasn't in me yet. But I still got all those feedback, and my confidence level started to grow. It just grew from there. Yeah, I mean, like everyone, I think we all want to connect with our past, with our roots. And I finally, when Obama took power, and I think it was in 2008, I think this is the opportunity. Things started to open up in Cuba, and I touched base with my uncle and with my cousins in Cuba and all that, and we kind of reconnected, and I said, I'm going to visit you guys. So I went over there. It brought a lot of great memories, and I had a great time. And so when I came back, I made a sculpture of Jose Marti. Everyone respects Jose Marti. He's a neutral ground. So I knew that if I was going to do a Cuban figure, Jose Marti was the person. Not only because I admire him as a person, as a writer, as this and that, not only because he's famous in Cuba, because he's also famous in Miami. They have statues of him in Miami as well. So I got a whole bunch of photographs of Jose Marti, put them in a board, and then I just got this block of paper that I had glued, and then I just started carving until his face started to come. And I said, wow. The resemblance was obviously there, but in my own terms, in my own language. No, my original idea was just to take Jose Marti and kind of do what I did in New York, Just take it to the streets and just kind of show people and grab their attention and just kind of reconnect with my Cuban culture. Cuba has always been synonymous with revolution. I want to start a revolution, but not a revolution like with arms and bullets and things like that. I want to start a art revolution with Jose Marti, with my new art. And I know it creates a revolution because I took it to New York and people just went crazy. And the first thing people wanted to do is video it and share it. The love part came out because when I took the word revolution, I started to look at it and then I saw love in the center. And then what I did is I highlighted the love, I turned it around, and so it became Love, Art, Revolution. And that's how the whole thing came together.
Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes, en los montes, montes, montes soy. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes y en los montes, montes, montes soy. Yo sé de nombres extraños de las hierbas y las flores y de mortales engaños y de sublimes dolores. Yo he visto en la noche oscura llover sobre mi cabeza los rayos de lumbre pura de la divina belleza. Denle al vano el oro tierno que arde y brilla en el crisol. A mí denme el bosque eterno cuando rompa en él el sol. Yo he visto el ocho tierra barbullendo en la redoma. Prefiero estar en la sierra cuando vuela una paloma. Soy el amor, soy el beso. Arpa soy, salterio soy. Donde vive el universo. Vengo del sol al sol voy. Soy el amor, soy el beso. Semper, love, art, revolution.
Felix is driving us to his studio located in Revolution Mills, a converted old cotton mill. Despite the name, Felix jokingly insists that the similarity with the name of his project is purely coincidental.
The place is called Revolution Mills. I mean, that's not the reason why I incorporated that into this project. Yeah, well, my original idea was just to go to Cuba and bring the sculpture and just bring a guy, my guy from New York. Actually, I told him about the whole thing, and he was like all excited. I said, you need to get your passport. He sent me a picture of his passport and all that, and then when I sent it to my cousin, she said, this ain't gonna happen. My cousin's in Cuba, in Havana. He said, well, you can't bring anybody. They're not gonna let you do it. First of all, it's not just that you can't even come with your sculpture because they'll take it away from you. This is a very delicate subject. The reason why it's a very delicate subject is, first of all, you're a Cuban American. So we don't know what the agenda is that you have behind all this. Secondly, you bring in a Cuban martyr in here, which is Jose Marti, which is the highest celebrity in Cuba. So these are all these things that we have. We don't know what your agenda is behind. So I had to fill out this long application. I had to explain to them and this and that. This took about a year. When I first got the idea about Cuba, I went and visited Cuba, and obviously my cousin, and she helped me to kind of organize things from the inside. Because I don't think if I would have had any help from the inside, I don't think I could have made this possible. Especially, bringing a sculpture to Cuba. Jose Marti. They gave me guidelines. They say you're not supposed to talk to people, and if you do, these are the places you cannot go. You cannot go here. But I felt their presence everywhere. I didn't talk politics at all, and that wasn't my intention either in the beginning. My objective was just to take my art there and to share it, and to share the love with art. I wasn't going to go over there and try to talk revolution, because I went to the Jose Marti Park, where the Jose Marti sculpture is. Pretty much everything in Cuba is Jose Marti. And you go to every public building, there's a sculpture of Jose Marti, a bust.
Marti was born in Havana, Cuba in 1853 to Spanish parents, and from a very young age he showed interest in literature, particularly in poetry. The island had been controlled by the Spanish since 1492, and Marti was just 15 years old when war broke out, the first of 3 Cuba fought in an effort to achieve independence from Spain. Marti did not fight in the war, but he was accused of treason and arrested for writing a letter to a friend criticizing the Spanish government. Initially sentenced to 6 years in a Cuban prison, Marti's punishment was changed to exile to Spain after he fell ill while incarcerated. Marti remained in Spain, where he studied and received his law degree at the age of 21. After graduating, Marti began a career in journalism, moving from one place to another. In 1895, the Third Cuban War for Independence broke out, and Marti returned to Cuba to fight for his homeland, back for the first time since his exile 24 years earlier. At the age of 42, Marti died in battle. The U.S. intervened in the war on the side of the Cubans after the sinking of the USS Maine, and Cuba finally obtained its independence in 1902. Marti never saw it, although his name would live on long after. Jose Marti is a key figure in Latin American literature of the 19th century. The famous song Guantanamera, which has become an unofficial Cuban patriotic anthem, is adapted from Marti's poems. Today, there are many statues of Jose Marti across the Americas, like this one in Central Park in New York City. The memory of Marti is also appreciated amongst the Cuban community in Miami, where there are many parks and statues bearing his name.
I go to Miami a lot. My dad's still alive and he lives in Miami, and I visit him as often as I can, several times a year at least. And now with Art Basel being hosted in Miami during the Christmas holidays every year, I think it has brought a lot of art to Miami. The art is definitely there, and then in comparison to the Cuban art, it's totally different because we have all the resources in the world to create whatever we want. In Cuba, they have to take an old piece of something and create art out of that. So it's totally different, but I think there's a connection there with creativity. You know, both countries are striving to create.
Wanting to take his project into a new phase, Felix decided to begin collaborating with artists in other mediums. Before taking this idea to Cuba, he wanted to test it first in the U.S., creating spontaneous performance art as dancers and singers responded through choreography or song in real time to his sculptures of other pop icons.
When I took my first sculpture to New York, I started to watch, documentaries and things like that about New York, and then I watched the Basquiat movie. I really got into the street art. My art has a lot of street influence.
Graffiti experienced a boom in New York and Philadelphia in the 1960s and 70s, but it wasn't until the early 80s that it began to be taken more seriously as a form of art, when some, like Brooklyn-based artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, made the jump from public spaces to private galleries. In his art, Basquiat blended words and images, abstraction and figuration, history and contemporary social commentary, Basquiat rocketed to an exclusive spot in the art scene as one of the youngest artists to penetrate the top-tier galleries and museums. He was just 27 when he died of a heroin overdose in his apartment in Great John Street in 1988.
Interacting with other artists because it's very spontaneous. We don't really plan stuff. I mean, there's a plan per se, but not really the details. So a lot of things happen that are just very artistic and spontaneous. A magazine, a fashion magazine, come and approached me, said they wanted to do a story on my work. The reporter called me back about a couple of weeks later. She said, "You know what? We're doing an interview with another guy. He's a dancer. He lives in Greensboro, where you live. And I think you two guys should meet because he's amazing. He's a great dancer. He loves street art. He loves Basquiat. And I know that you have a passion for Basquiat as well and his art and all that. So we did a collaboration where I had my sculpture Basquiat and he would do his dance.
I got this space so that I could open it up to like artists that need just a space to be themselves, and he already like blessed the place, I had one musician that came in and he did a great job. He's my first visual artist to come in here and bless the space, and like I couldn't ask for like a better situation,
I thought it was a great idea to meet with Dom. He's very talented break dancer, and he does actually a dancer, period. He does a lot of great, beautiful dancing, but he does a lot of break dancing. He's really good at it.
Another artist born and bred in Brooklyn, like Basquiat, was rapper Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G. He started rapping in the streets to entertain people while he was just a teenager. Growing up in one of the most neglected areas of the city at the time, Biggie entered into contact with crime at a young age and spent some time in jail. After his release, he made a demo tape that attracted the interest of producer Sean Combs. Biggie would go on to release 2 multi-platinum albums. His music was often autobiographical, with lyrics spanning a broad range of topics. In 1997, he was murdered in a shooting in LA. With 2 more albums posthumously released, Biggie is remembered today as one of the greatest rappers of all time.
Childhood friend of mine growing up. We You saw him on the street?
I saw him on the street. I talked to him. I conversate with him. I watched him walk down the block. We used to hang on Quincy and Franklin. I used to watch him walk through the block with his couple of friends, and they used to hang out over here. That's where the famous battle raps and stuff happen over there.
Right there.
Yeah. So it was dope to see a childhood friend become an icon. You know, it was awesome. It's like ridiculous.
I know Big for many years. My first time meeting Big when we put 50 grand in his basement when he first did his CD and stuff. His thing. Big is a funny guy. His character, like so many people love him. He can just look at you and just rank on you like there's no problem or anything. I love him. I miss him. We all miss him, man. He was one of the kings. Nobody gonna be just like him. Nobody gonna know replace him, man. We miss Big.
I felt connected with rappers. I used to hang out at Union Square, and every Friday in Union Square, in the summertime, the rappers, a group of rappers, do for what is called freestyle. So what they do is they have a beat. They all get in a circle and they start rapping to this beat.
We do this every week. This the 4th week. Barking dog, when the dogs speak, you can understand they watching this like it was Shark Week.
Yo, we sending these beats crazy like in loco parentis. See what we on now, you can feel it when we said this.
It's sort of like food for thought. I guess I'm serving a sentence.
That was my vision. I said, I'm gonna bring Biggie, I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna bring him here, set him up, and these guys are just gonna freak out. They're gonna rap to it, and that's exactly what happened.
Shifting the axis. Like you know the way I'm a bandage. Yes, once again, I'm the Spanish kid. Or maybe the way they couldn't handle it. Wax on, maybe get the candle lit. I'm thinking Mr. Miyagi. I'm thinking I'm an alien. Anunnaki. Or maybe Illuminati. If they trying to battle with you, it's all cool, man. They fold up like origami. They don't understand the way we come through my mente. Speaking through the hand.
It's funny killing people when they eat the flow. Slip it up and drop it so. Feel the rhythm make it so. Fucking go mental and enter my mental. With sharp like a pencil. So take a note. I am your teacher, the master, the teacher of knowledge. And there's no problem. Stand up if you got some. I move that for Bible. I'm
coming at you live and direct. Coming alive with your speakers. So I gotta get my check. So I can take over.
I call it poetry in motion. I was fascinated with it. These guys just went crazy. It was just like, it was such a beautiful thing because you can just feel the love.
Obstacle can't stop you. Problem can't stop you. People can't stop you. Only you yourself can stop you. People can't stop you. Obstacle can't stop you. Grammy got me feeling like Biggie, cause the sky's the limit. Got me rolling up an out. Man, you see the clouds a minute. Someone once told me more money, more problems with it. Reaching for the stars, penthouse business. I got the soul, the vision on, I do my own thing. Just let me go, I'm next to blow. I pray I won't change. I've been taking time to waste them all.
With all paperwork and permits for filming in hand at last, Felix was ready to head to Cuba.
Jose Marti and I got in the plane. Yeah, he was actually in the luggage department. So I was scared because I didn't know if they were going to open it, but they didn't, because he was really wrapped up in plastic, and he was in one of those long luggages. And he doesn't. The great thing about Marti is he's not very big, so he's kind of compact, and he's not very heavy. So I think it worked out just fine. My cousin, she helped me a lot with that because she knew a lot of people in Cuba. Then, this thing started getting bigger. Her husband actually worked for a documentary company that they did a lot of things with Germans and a lot of foreign countries that would go there and do TV shows and things like that. And we did interviews with different artists.
At the beginning of his trip, Felix notices a familiar face sitting in one of the seats as the plane takes off. The Cuban artist Luis Rodriguez Noa. Noa is one of the key figures of the so-called special period in Cuba. Felix couldn't believe his luck.
So I'm in the plane going to Cuba, and with the sculpture that same day. There's a guy over there with his hair, you know. I said, I saw a documentary of a Cuban artist, and he happened to be in that documentary. It's called Alumbrones. I was in the back, and as I get up, we're all leaving the plane, and I said, you know this? And I said, yeah, how do you know? I said, oh, I saw the documentary. It's incredible. I love your work. I said, is there any way we can, I'm here to do a documentary. Is there any way I can, we can get together? I said, absolutely. Here's my phone number. I'm in Havana. I'm going to be here for a while. So whenever you want, you come on over and call me. It's perfect. So that was I was amazed. Walked up to his apartment. He lives in a really, really old building in old Havana. I remember going up, and the building looked a little bit dilapidated, but of course every building over there does. And he lives like on the second floor in this whole floor. But I was impressed with the height of the ceiling. It looked like an old world apartment. And all his art is everywhere. He's just painting there and all that. It's just fascinating. We were there was like, the neighbors were just playing drum, like Santeria. There was just like drum all day, boom, 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 boom. It's like, what the... So he said it was going, and it was just going on and on while we were there. Just these drums just keep going and going. It's like a trance. I love his work. His art is very, very simple. It reminded me a lot of Joan Miro. And I think he was influenced, and I think I mentioned that to him. He said, yeah, I'm glad you saw that, because I am influenced by Miro. I thought he was a cool guy, and he was fascinating. He really played with the sculpture. Back in the what is called a special period in Cuba, which is basically when the Soviet Union shut down, it became no more communism, became Russia. Cuba had no allies really, and it was alone. So he had to figure out how to do it on his own. There's not all the resources that we have here in the States, so he has to bring a lot of his materials and things for the art on the plane, because he can't get them in Cuba, obviously. So he would bring a lot of his paints, his brushes. He said he would have to, because he has to improvise a lot.
Here it's difficult to get canvas, oil, acrylic, anything, even brushes. So everybody tries to work with the things that are within reach. In my case, I'm lucky to be able to travel and bring materials. As I was telling you on the plane, I checked in 2 suitcases full of materials like brushes, materials for engraving, linoleum, and even screen printing materials. Something that I've experimented with is solvents. I use gasoline, lubricants, but I can't bring those things on the plane, for example. Those things are flammable and I can't bring them.
There's so much color on the streets in Havana. All the buildings are painted in different color. Plus, it's like my work of art. I work my paintings in layers. For example, I'll paint a color and I'll paint over, but I'll leave a little bit of it. And I'll paint a color again, I'll scratch it. And so, it's got all these layers, these meanings all behind it. The same with all the buildings in Cuba. You watch any building in Cuba, it's been painted 1,000 times since the 1940s. And all these layers are just peeling off, and you see all these paints and all these colors and the smells and the music. They kind of had guidelines. Okay, you can't go here, you can't go there. I forget the places, and you can't really talk to people. But I did. I made pamphlets with Jose Marti, and it's called Love Revolution. And they were so happy to see, happy to see Jose Marti, that I chose a hero that they love. We went to this guy, and then, it was he had a convertible 1956 Chevy, and it was like, wow, this is beautiful. filming guy was in the back with a camera, and then the driver with his straw hat and all that, and me in the front, and then Jose Martí back in the back. You know, we gave him the story.
El proyecto que estamos haciendo es del arte mía, de una escultura que yo hice, de papel todo, que se abre, como si fuera un acordeón.
My parents lived in a small apartment in Havana, in old Havana, like 2 blocks away from the Capitol building.
Yo me crié como a 2 cuadras de aquí. En los Estados Unidos, Carolina del Norte.
I had some good memories. I used to ride bike in the street and play with friends, and you know, even though there was a shortage of food and there was a shortage of freedom, as a kid I didn't know that. I didn't experience that. My dad wanted to take us out of Cuba and give us a better life, bring us to the United States. That was the ultimate goal. My dad's father was born in Spain in the Basque region. According to the Spanish laws, he's still a Spanish citizen, so he was able to apply for a visa to go through Spain. And it took him 7 years to leave the country because the Cuban regime just didn't want him to leave, didn't want to let him go that easily. So they overworked him in the fields and cutting sugar cane and things like that. So it was a tough life. Every few months he would get to come home, like every 3 months, and then, you know, and then I'd go with him for like a week or something, then somebody would bring me back. They finally gave my dad the freedom to leave Spain. All we had was like, you know, I remember my mother and my grandmother were sewing me my clothes, because obviously in Cuba there were no stores. You couldn't go buy an outfit to go to Spain. So they made, you know, like, with these really thin materials, and like I had shorts and a little shirt. So when we got to Madrid, it was in January. It was like the coldest month. And back then, of course, you know, global warming hadn't taken place, so it was really cold. So when we got to Spain, it was like, I don't know, like 25 degrees, 30 degrees. It was really cold. My parents had a friend from Cuba that had left there, so they, you know, he called some people up and everything. We really didn't have anything. I think we ended up going to, like, the Catholic Church gave us a place to stay or something like that. And then they fed us and gave us food until, you know, they helped my dad get a job. You know, I started going to school. My dad rented an apartment. My dad started doing construction work in Spain. He got a car.
Felix had to leave Spain alone. His family could not come with him. He had to travel first to the States, obtain a green card, and then he could claim his family. He was 8.
I had to travel by myself. I remember going to Puerto Rico. They gave me a green card. I talked to this guy, and then all of a sudden I'm in Miami. And I think I stayed with some friends of my parents. I didn't like Miami at all. My parents hated Miami. Once finally they came like a couple of months later, and we reunited and all that. It was very tough.
next stop was Jose Emilio Fuentes Fonseca, known professionally as Jeff, because of his initials. Felix paid him a visit in his apartment in Havana.
The first thing in Cuba people do is they offer you coffee. Café. So that's the first thing he did. He makes coffee and we talk and this and that. And he was having so much fun with my sculpture. He was just playing around with it. He said, wow, this is so fluid. It's, they're solid and it's also fluid. It's just amazing. He kind of put together an idea that I hadn't thought about. Jose Marti, being a writer, his paper was the most important thing to him. That's where he wrote all his poems. That's where he did a lot of his thinking. So that paper is now being translated into my sculpture inside. So it's kind of like it comes together.
I'm sure that if you'd asked Marti, one of the ways he would have liked to have been remembered would be in constant movement. I always had Marti as that figure that I'd been taught at school. But it wasn't until I first spent some time outside of Cuba that I understood Marti. I understood what it was like to be away from his house, from his loved ones. I understood a Marti in exile, and I understood why he did so much for his country, even losing his life.
His apartment was beautiful. It was like on the 10th floor, and it was very artistic. All his paintings, which I love his paintings, very simple, very just straight to the point. He had elephant paintings, he had different kinds of things in there.
I always had some inclination for the arts, very primitive because my family is very humble. It all started in a park. I was painting and a passerby said, "Hey, you have skills." He then asked me if I wanted to study art or something like that. I said yes, and he helped me enroll in a training in the arts. That happened when I was 13. So I'm a person who's gone through all the filters and mediums of the art, academia and such. Now I just bought a studio and I intend to make it grow and add value. I feel the debt to my teacher, who found me in that park and told me, "You have skills. Would you like to study art?" I think the best thing I can do for that gesture is to continue it.
Categorized by some as naive art or primitivism, Jeff's work is highly influenced by the nostalgia of childhood and toys.
He makes these huge elephants, actually blown up out of metal. He explained to me how he made it. He takes metals and then he'll weld them in the shape of what he wants. Flat metals with but hollow on the inside, and then he'll put a valve in them. And he blows it up and he makes these gigantic elephants. They look like they're real and they're massive.
My art is based on my own experience. It's very autobiographical. I realized something so simple, which was always there and will be. We were all children once. And I thought I could express myself as an artist through child language. One day, I was with my brother who used to help me weld. And I suggested, let's make a cube and inject air into it. The results blew my mind. And that's how I started experimenting with inflated metal. There is a large fan base, especially amongst the ordinary people, not amongst the critics, that follows my work. Every time I present an exhibition in public spaces, I have a good response, like with the elephant sculptures. I could never have expected something like that.
The word was out that Jeff was a party animal. Jeff liked to party like it's 1999. Somebody told me that he had a party one time in his place, and there was like 2 days partying nonstop. So I kind of suggest, I'm open for a party if you would like. He said, "No, I can't. I got to travel. I got to do this. I got to." Shucks. I wanted to find out what his parties was like. It didn't happen.
The tropical island of Cuba lies in the Caribbean Sea, just south of the United States and east of Mexico. It is only 90 miles from the United States, so near that the affairs of the two countries have always been closely related. Cuba's strategic position puts it on important sea lanes. Here, here, and here. Two of these lanes are gateways to the Panama Canal. Because of its strategic position, Cuba was called the key to the New World by the early Spanish explorers. Its nearness to America has made it a good neighbor, a neighbor whose history is closely related to that of the United States. Cuba's natural wealth includes many valuable products. Among them are tropical woods such as mahogany, tropical fruits such as pineapple, special crops such as high-grade tobacco, and of course, the most important single product, sugar. The Cubans, too, appreciate the beauties of their own land. Sometimes for recreation, Miguel takes his family for a drive through Havana. Among the familiar Havana sights that the family sees is this statue of José Martí, the hero of Cuba's War of Independence. They pass the Capitol, a beautiful building that resembles the United States Capitol in Washington.
For many Cubans, the years before 1959 were hard. As in many other countries, the Cuban peasants rarely owned the land they worked so hard to till. For the urban masses, life in city slums was also depressing. Filth and disease flourished, yet most of these poor Cubans, the proletarian mob, suffered their lot almost as if they were unaware that there was another way to live. When Fidel Castro is ready to come out of the Sierra Maestre, his support is based not on the poor, but on the middle class. Many believe, few doubt, the revolution is a success. But in the enthusiasm of the revolution, few Cubans, even in the middle class, believe that Fidel Castro will ever turn communist. At first, he promises free elections. He acknowledges many of the traditional rights of citizens and the established institutions of government. But the elections never take place, and the government quickly becomes an instrument of coercion.
I love film. I love old films. 1920, Charlie Chaplin. I mean, you name it. I love all kinds of films. When I lived in Cuba, I used to go to a movie theater that was a block away just by myself. They had a Russian propaganda movie. It was in color, I remember that, but it was like a 1950s color, you know, it was like Technicolor. So it was beautiful with all these blonde kids with blue eyes eating apples. And of course, we don't have any of that in Cuba. So I was like, oh my God, I would love to eat an apple. Well, that's like an exotic food or a grape. So when I got to Spain, that was like one of the first things we did. You know, I told him, I want to eat an apple, I want to eat a grape. So we went to the market, and it was, you know, back then in Madrid, they had like an outdoor market. I remember seeing these big apples, and I bit into them. It was like incredible. I loved them. It was such an amazing flavor that I had never tasted. Yeah, my ideas come from anywhere. It just happens. I think all artists are inspired by their surroundings. One day we had a Lay's potato chip in the counter, and I said, yeah, I think I can make this. I remember my uncle used to work for a cigar company. He used to roll cigars, my mother's brother. And I remember when I was like 6 years old, he showed up at the house one day with a little cigar. He said, yeah, I can make you a cigar for you. I think somehow I linked the cigar with Cuba. local television people that wanted to interview me. And they said, why don't we do it at the John Lennon Park? Pretty fascinating to find a sculpture of John Lennon sitting down, and I sat next to him. In good company.
No visit to Havana is complete without a visit to La Bodeguita del Medio, which literally translates to the little bodega in the middle of the block.
La Bodeguita del Medio. All these international celebrities and artists, even from back in the day, even I think Che Guevara and all these people also wrote on the walls. So they write on the walls and say, I was here and this and that, and they have their message and their thing. This live music, and I had a mojito. I mean, you go to Cuba, anywhere you go, there's rum and music. Guajira Guantanamera. It's a Jose Marti poem, and they're playing it. I didn't tell them to play, they were just playing it. My sculpture in, but we did film there, and then I showed a lot of people, the video of my sculpture.
Felix next paid a visit to Manuel Lopez Oliva, a renowned Cuban artist whose work has been exhibited in numerous international exhibitions and who for a time also played a role as an important art critic in Cuba.
My cousin, she knows a lot of people in Cuba. She said, you gotta show your work to this guy, because first of all, he's a major art critic in Havana. He's been an art critic since the 60s. And he's also an artist. I take out my Marti, I said, I want you to look at this. He said, oh, Marti, yeah, of course. I mean, Marti, what's so special about Marti? It's everywhere. Again, like what everybody says. I said, wait. So I unpack him and all that stuff, and he's like sitting around this kitchen. I have the Marti right there on top of the counter. He's being a critic. He's talking about, the lines, the sculpture. Oh, I see you have, your influence here, and then I see you have very stylistic, just critic talk. And I said, okay. And I said, how about this? He said, what the hell? When I do that, he's like, oh my God. You can see his face just light up immediately. It's like somebody turned on a light bulb. And he was so happy. And then he wanted to play with it, of course. He's going, oh my God. And then he starts giving me ideas. He said, you should do the next one with like paper coming out, just loose paper and just crumbled up. I said, he had all these ideas. I said, okay, good.
It is a shame for various reasons you have to keep sculptures limited to less than 5 feet. That's because they're very heavy. This one's 50 pounds. I think that you should start studying with people specialized in the field of materials, such as construction. In what way a sculpture that does not weigh could be made with paper and materials related to paper? Maybe an empty sculpture, hollow inside. Or even a mechanism that inflates inside and creates the shape.
We were, talking there for a while. We got real comfortable. I opened the sculpture. we were talking about my sculpture, he remembered that he had made a painting of Jose Marti a while back. So he went and looked for it and got it out, and we kind of commented on that, you know, the resemblance and, you know, the love for Marti.
I was born on May 19th. That's the date of Marti's death. I always had to celebrate my birthday with activities about Marti. My birthday was mixed, combined with the memory of Marti. I've never been interested in representing that Marti that everyone does. The first Marti I painted was almost pop art. Then I painted an expressionist Marti. At one point, I even made an erotic drawing of Marti in bed, making love to a beautiful woman. I made that one during a very difficult time in Cuban culture, known as the Pavonato, which is the decade of the 1970s in which there was tough control. They did not understand my open vision. And nothing happened to me, but they told me not to put it in an exhibition because it could disappear. So what I did was sell it to a German, and I saved it just in case. Because at that time, there was very strong censorship.
When I met him, he was doing a lot of paintings with like film, what looked like film rolls, just rolling around, and he had, I guess, a lot of influence from film. They're very detailed, and he takes a lot of time. We sat on the floor, yeah, because I mean, he wanted to be down and dirty as an artist, you know. He didn't want to be like sitting up on a chair and all that. He said, let's just sit on the floor, and we talk on the floor. I said, sure, no problem.
I started doing art criticism because it was the suggestion of some of my teachers. They said that it would be interesting if there was a critic who did not have a literary and detached approach, but who made a criticism from within. I started doing criticism when I was 21, exactly the same age that Jose Marti was when he started doing art criticism in Mexico. So at 21, I was one of the most important critics in Cuba. I received awards for my work as a critic. But to me, criticism was always something I did from the artist's perspective. As the years passed by, I realized that I should not be judge and jury anymore. Starting in the 1980s in Cuba, a new generation of critics appeared with a lot of knowledge and maturity, and I realized I was no longer necessary. At the peak of the special period, I put a sign on the door to my studio that was collapsing. The critic is dead. The artist survives. And there the art critic ended. I have a project that I don't know if I'll be able to fulfill because life is finite. Although it is infinite in works of art, it is finite in regards to our permanence on the face of the earth. That project would be to make a different kind of cinema. It's something I'm thinking about, but I don't know if I'll be able to fulfill it. But in any case, I have tried to keep the art critic within my artistic work. My work is made with the resources of the art critic and the social critic. I think that it is not possible that an art critic is not at the same time a social critic. You cannot ignore the context of the problems of society. I think it would be interesting if you made a statue of Marti looking down at the earth, not looking up. The last few years have been very difficult, when you don't even have the idea of the utopia anymore. For you, this is a kind of return to your roots, as if you were riding a winged Marti back to Cuba.
Can't stop you, only you yourself can stop you. Semper, my brother, tell them.
I really want to collaborate with somebody in Cuba. And my idea was originally to do some art with somebody in Cuba. But I said, nah, that's not going to happen because I've already got my art. I want somebody to create something. So I said, you know, I love going to New York and seeing rappers and things like that. I know there's Cuban rappers. That was my vision. So I wanted to kind of do the rap deal. I wanted to find a good rapper. And then they found Telmary. Telmary is a famous Cuban rapper. She's not really she doesn't like to call herself a rapper. I think she calls herself more like a poet. She's mostly a poet and that sings. And she creates all her own music. And so she got inspired with my work. When they told her about my work, if she wanted to collaborate, she said absolutely. When she saw that, she said, oh my God, she wrote this music. And she was just fascinated with it. And she wrote this amazing song, inspired by Jose Marti's poems and with my sculpture.
Telmary's style defies an easy classification. Some people would call it rap, but she describes her work as a fusion of traditional hip-hop with an eclectic array of genres like Afro-Cuban Latin funk or jazz. In 2018, her album Fuerza Arara was nominated to the 19th Latin Grammys Best Alternative Music Album.
She had this huge orchestra with people playing violin, guitars, drums, I mean, you name it. It was this amazing group of talented people just there playing. And in this amazing recording studio, actually the recording studio that we were at was the same recording studio where Buena Vista Social Club recorded their song. So, I mean, this is like, I couldn't believe it. A professional recording studio where all the major stars in Cuba recorded. She said, okay, I want you to be in the music. I want you to be in the song. I said, yeah, I don't know how to sing. I'm going to give you a small part in the beginning. Just repeat after me. I have no ear for music.
Yo soy un hombre sincero de donde crece la palma. Y antes de morir me quiero echar mis versos del alma.
We got there like around 6 o'clock at night with all her people. And you know, musicians, I mean, they like to work late. So, you know, I normally by 12, 1 o'clock, I'm already exhausted. These people were getting going at 2 o'clock in the morning. They brought bottles of rum. We were just drinking and singing, and it's like, what the heck? We had a great time. We were there like until 4 o'clock in the morning recording. Like after we recorded that, she said, you know, I'm doing a show in a concert bar / bar. That was the first time she sang the song in public.
I see myself as a communicator, someone with a great desire to communicate, to express. I was lucky to be able to grab a microphone and express myself. I initially wanted to become a journalist, but did not pass the admission test. Then I realized that a mic in hand is a very strong tool with a lot of power. If you write an article, it can be censored, but with the microphone, I felt I could be myself. I feel indebted to the hip-hop movement, but I don't think I'm just a rapper. I prefer to call myself a jazz poet, a wizard of words, or a spoken word artist. In my house, we used to listen to all kinds of music. All these influences made me choose music as a career. At a critical moment in my life, when I wasn't sure about which direction to take, the first time I picked up a microphone was at a party organized by a friend of mine. I had become a sort of organizer and promoter of some electronic music parties, which were almost prohibited in Cuba. Back then, the electronic music movement was pretty much unknown. While my friend was putting on the music, I took the microphone and started rapping the things I had written. In the end, it became common for me to do this at all his concerts. It is interesting that I succeeded in a project in which they were all men and I was the only woman, at a time when there weren't many female rappers. This became a breakthrough event in the history of Cuban hip-hop. Since it was the first time that a woman showed up as a rapper, neither a showgirl nor a singer, but the protagonist of the project. I was always interested in doing something completely Cuban. I was not as interested in hip-hop as I was in Cuban music. I thought I could enrich hip-hop with something from our culture. For instance, you have asked me to adapt Martí's simple verses and to turn it into a musical piece, and I have done so. I never had the support from my father. My mother had been a dancer, but my situation was worse. I was a rapper. All of this helped me to fight to prove to my family that whatever I did, it had to be very good. If I failed, they would give me a really hard time.
Soy un hombre sincero de donde crece la palma. Y antes de morir me quiero echar mis versos del alma. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes, en los montes, montes, montes soy. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes y en los montes, montes, montes soy. Yo sé de nombres extraños de las hierbas y las flores y de mortales engaños y de sublimes dolores. Yo he visto en la noche oscura llover sobre mi cabeza los rayos de lumbre pura de la divina belleza. Denle al vano el oro tierno que arde y brilla en el crisol. A mí denme el bosque eterno cuando rompa en él el sol. Yo he visto el ocho tierra barbullendo en la redoma. Prefiero estar en la sierra cuando vuela una paloma. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes, en los montes, montes, montes soy. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes y en los montes, montes, montes soy. Todo es hermoso y constante, todo es música y razón, y todo como el diamante antes que luzca el carbón. Yo sé de las historias viejas del hombre y sus rencillas, y prefiero las abejas volando en las campanillas. Yo sé del canto del viento en las ramas vocingleras. Nadie me diga que miento, que lo prefiero de veras. Duermo en mi cama de roca, mi sueño dulce y profundo. Roza una abeja en mi boca y crece en mi cuerpo el mundo. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes, en los montes, montes, montes soy. Yo vengo de todas partes y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes y en los montes, montes, montes soy. Sé de un pintor atrevido que sale a pintar contento sobre la tela del viento y la espuma del olvido. Yo sé de un pintor gigante, el de divinos colores, puesto a pintarle las flores a un corbeta mercante. Yo sé de un pobre pintor que mira el agua al pintar, el agua ronca del mar con un entrañable amor. Porque noto alma torcida que en mi pecho milagroso, mientras más honda es la herida, es mi canto más hermoso. Arpa soy, salterio soy, donde vibra el universo. Vengo del sol al sol voy. Soy el amor, soy el beso. Arpa soy, salterio soy, donde vibra el universo. Vengo del sol al sol voy. Soy el amor, soy el beso. 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 Semper, love, art, revolution.
after I graduated from high school and all that, I got married early. And I got a job there doing paste up and doing some paste up artists and things like that. But when you didn't have anything to do in the front, you would go in the back and you kind of help whatever you did in the back. Cut paper, fold sheets, whatever it was. I remember going back there and cutting stacks of paper like in this big cutter. And I remember making these shapes. Every time I would cut the paper, the paper would make the shapes. So I was thinking about, man, what about if I make a design like that and just glue it on one side? I think that was the beginning of my sculptures, that I was kind of visualizing how it was going to come. And obviously years later, I was able to tap into that and then develop my art. And, obviously in a different extent, but I think that was the beginning. I love life and I love art, and sometimes in life, we go through life and we think that some things happen and they're bad and they're terrible, and we don't know how we're going to come out at the other side. But I think finding your passion and living with your passion, I think you're going to find the light at the end of the tunnel. I love paella and I love cooking Mediterranean style. And it just brings me back to my roots in Spain. It's another way to reconnect. We get inspired by what our experiences have been, by what we've gone through, what we see, what we lived. So all these experiences, all these cultures like Cuban, Spain, United States, my art has definitely evolved and has been able to evolve the way it has because of all these things that have come together. Yeah, I do have a lot of crazy ideas with motors and with things, and I'm incorporating real things with paper, and it's just, wood. It's just like all kinds of ideas that I have. Art in Cuba is everywhere. The Cuban artists are very resourceful, they're very creative, very artistic. And I think, they have been recognized somewhat in the United States, but not to the extent that they should. The Cuban people are open to new ideas, to new art, and to what I brought in Cuba, the love art revolution. I think all that just kind of combined itself completely, and it all came together. Harmony of arts coming together. Old world, new world, Cuba, everything that I had in mind, it just kind of got incorporated into this project.